Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's incredible to me that the Premier repeats day after day complaints about the failures of the NDP while boasting of implementing an NDP plan to fix healthcare. It just shows how little difference there really is between these parties. The Premier's decision to hire back Dr. David Peachey raises a lot of questions, as do Dr. Peachey's recent statements. Dr. Peachey claimed that the nurses told him changes were great when nurses' union said they've never been worse. He implied Manitoba has had a sudden spike in the number of old people who live here. Now, I don't want to blame Dr. Peachey because everything he's saying fits in perfectly with this government's strategy of gutting healthcare while gaslighting Manitobans and telling them everything is fine. The question is why Dr. Peachey is being hired at all. This government ignored much of his advice. Are they just spending more public money so they can justify postponing a politically inconvenient ER closure in the middle of an election?
The Honourable First Minister.
That applause wasn't deserved, Madam Speaker. No. Actually, what we're doing is what we've continued to dedicate ourselves to doing, which is to fix a broken system and make it work better for the people of Manitoba.
Chair. The Honourable Leader of the Second Opposition on a supplementary question.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's also critical to correct the inaccurate statements the Premier and his ministers have been making hundreds of times in and out of this chamber. Health transfers are going up 3%. This government only increased healthcare spending once, and that was 3 years ago. This Premier promised to cut at the top, but not only are there people on the front line who are burned out, broken, and discouraged, this government is creating an entirely new level of bureaucracy. Shared services. The Premier wants an election. Manitobans deserve the truth. Will the Premier just admit that the health system will never see an increase under his watch?
The Honourable First Minister.
It's $414 million higher this year, never was under the NDP, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Second Opposition on a final supplementary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. There's a term for what the Premier and his ministers have been doing to Manitobans. It's gaslighting. So when doctors, nurses, healthcare workers, patients, the WRHA, CAHI, the Wage Terms Task Force all tell this government things aren't working, the answer is to deny it and what's more, to blame the people who are raising it. I feel a lot of sympathy for Dr. Peachey because this government seems to be making him the fall guy for their own failures, since they bulldozed ahead with reckless changes over the objections of many experts. Given the Premier's track record of firing anyone who stands up to him, if Dr. Peachey recommends that Concordia ERs stays open, why should we have any faith the Premier will listen?
The Honourable First Minister.
Well, because unlike his allies in Ottawa, we defend the rule of law, transparency and fairness, and will continue to do that, Madam Speaker. The Leader of the Second Opposition wants taxes to be higher. He wants bigger subsidies for special interests. He wants higher business taxes. He thinks the previous NDP government didn't have a big enough bureaucracy and didn't spend enough. He'd reinstate the vote tax. He wants us to borrow more money on the futures of our children. And Madam Speaker, this is the mandate he hopes to be elected on, and that explains, I think, in part why he doesn't have anybody with him today.